I wasn't supposed to stay long. That was the original plan. Just a few weeks of recovery after my gallbladder surgery. Then back to my little cottage on Mulberry Lane, a quiet place with chipped shutters and a lemon tree in the back that never quite grew right. But things changed. Aldrich said it gently, the way adult children do when they're trying to sound helpful. But I've already made the decision for you, Mom. It doesn't make sense for you to live alone anymore. You're still healing. And we have the space. Helene smiled tightly beside him, her hands folded over her silk blouse. Of course. You'll be more comfortable here. And I grateful. Still groggy from painkillers and not wanting to make things difficult, agreed. I moved in. That was over a year ago. The cottage was sold not long after. Aldrich had asked if I'd consider it just to help clear out some capital for a promising business opportunity he was pursuing. He said he needed a bridge loan to keep things afloat. I didn't even blink. I signed the sale papers and wired the funds without asking too many questions. That house was meant to be temporary. After all, I'd bought it a few months before Aldrich got married, but it had never truly felt like home. This house did. Roland and I built it together when Aldrich was still in grade school. We'd poured concrete ourselves, picked the shingles one by one, watched it settle into the neighborhood like a tree taking root. When Aldrich got married and moved in, I let them treat it as their home. I never corrected anyone when they called him the owner. But the truth was, through the trust, the house was still under my name. Roland had made sure of that. It stayed in the family. That was what mattered. I took the guest room. I cooked most nights. I babysat Jessa when Helene had errands or needed a minute. I learned to fold my time into the quiet corners of their life like laundry left in a basket too long. But lately, something had shifted. The way Helene avoided my eyes. The way Aldrich flinched when I asked small questions. It felt like silence had started to mean something new. Then, one morning in May, Helene knocked once and stepped into my room. She was holding a printed sheet of paper, bullet points. Like a contract. I just think we need boundaries, she said. Not unkindly, but with that brittle edge she often used when discussing structure. No commenting on Jessa's schedule. No altering the grocery list. No baking without asking. No bringing up my late husband at dinner. And above all, no unsolicited advice on parenting. I didn't say anything. Just nodded, folded the paper, and slipped it into the drawer with my pain medication. That afternoon, I sat on the porch while the wind carried the scent of lilacs through the screen door. I could hear laughter from the kitchen. Helene, teaching Jessa how to make her favorite store-bought brownie mix. I used to teach her how to measure flour by touch. But that was years ago. Now, I wasn't even asked to stir. The next morning, I noticed the photo frame in the hallway had been replaced. It used to show Aldrich as a boy, seated in my lap, both of us smiling. Now, it was a family shot, just the three of them. Jessa's birthday fell on a Saturday that year. Sunny, warm. The kind of weather you couldn't plan for but always hoped would land on special days. I woke early to start the apple cinnamon coffee cake. The one she used to love when she was little. She'd called it spiced cloud cake when she was 5. I still remembered how she'd scooped the crumb topping with her fingers before it had even cooled. I worked carefully, quietly, dusting the flour across the counter so it wouldn't wake anyone. The scent of apples and brown sugar filled the kitchen by 8. I even wrapped the cake in a cloth napkin embroidered with Jessa's initials, just something small I'd stitched last winter. Helene came down first. She stopped short when she saw the cake on the counter. "Oh," she said, "I didn't know you were baking today. I thought it might be nice for Jessa. Just a little surprise." Helene gave a tight smile. "That's sweet. But we already ordered cupcakes. Custom ones. You know, theme colors and all that. It's probably better to keep things simple." She didn't ask me to put the cake away. But she didn't have to. Later, while the yard was being decorated with pastel streamers and gold balloons, Helene asked if I wouldn't mind staying upstairs, just so the kids can spread out. She said, "And you're hip. Of course you shouldn't be on your feet too much." I smiled and said I understood. I always said I understood. From the upstairs window, I could see them setting up folding tables, a magician arriving in a red van, and a photo booth shaped like a castle. The music played all afternoon. The laughter rose and faded like waves. No one came upstairs. I had saved a slice of the cake on a small plate in my room, untouched, that night. Scrolling through Facebook, I saw the photos, Helene and Aldrich posing by the fountain, Jessa blowing out candles, friends, teachers, even Aldrich's boss. I looked through every picture. I wasn't in a single one. The next day, I came home from the library and found my keys no longer worked. At first, I thought I had the wrong key. I tried it twice, then checked the second one on my chain. Same result. The lock turned stiffly, but didn't give. I jiggled the knob, confused, then noticed the envelope taped to the door with my name typed neatly across the front. The message inside was brief. "Selverine, we've decided it's best for everyone if you take some time away. There's a transitional shelter in Eastport that can assist with housing and meals. This is not permanent, just space for all of us to breathe. We'll bring your essentials down shortly. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Helene and Aldrich." I stood there for a long time. The porch light flickered above me, though it was still daylight. A neighbor's sprinkler ticked rhythmically a few houses down. Nothing felt real. My suitcase and knitting bag sat on the edge of the porch bench, neatly packed, as if this had been planned. I didn't knock. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to the diner near the marina. I sat in a booth by the window and ordered a cup of tea. The waitress brought me chamomile without asking. I must have looked like I needed soft things. I stayed there until dusk, nursing the same cup. I didn't call anyone. I didn't cry. When it got dark, I booked a cheap motel room using the emergency debit card I kept tucked in the lining of my purse. I'd never needed it until now. Inside the motel, I opened my email and logged into the estate account, the one I had managed since Roland passed. The balance stared back at me like a slap 124.06. It should have been over 1.9 million. I scrolled through the transaction history. Dozens of withdrawals, transfers, name changes. My name was no longer on the account. His was. Their names were. And mine had been erased. My hands trembled as I paged through the account activity. The transactions were meticulous, calculated transfers into a series of joint accounts, business-related expenses under Helene's boutique name, and then larger sums moved into Aldrich's private savings. It had been happening slowly over months. I hadn't noticed because the notifications were routed to an email I hadn't checked in years, the one I used only for bank confirmations. Somewhere along the way, they had changed the contact details. Somewhere along the way, they had prepared for this. I leaned back against the headboard of the motel bed, blinking at the peeling wallpaper and the hum of the air conditioner. The account had been created when Roland died, with instructions specific to me, language we wrote together, drafted carefully so no one could contest it. It was meant to protect the house, my retirement, and Jessa's future education. And yet here it was, gutted. I'd backed up the trust documents months ago, just in case. Now, sitting on the motel bed, I opened that folder for the first time in years. I searched my old folders on the cloud. The digital copies were still there. Trust documents, notarized statements, signed amendments. I read through them again, every word familiar. I remembered the day Roland and I visited the attorney's office, how he squeezed my hand while I initialed each page. I remembered the clause he insisted on adding, that no changes could be made without my written consent. That clause still stood, which meant they had forged something. I checked the e-signature file. The document that removed me from account control was dated February 12th, 2 days after I'd been heavily medicated post-surgery. I had no memory of signing anything that week, but my signature was there, clumsy and oddly shaped, like someone trying to imitate my hand. They hadn't just locked me out of the house. They had stolen my trust, my history, my peace. I stared at the screen until the motel Wi-Fi disconnected and forced me back to the login page. Then I closed the laptop and sat still, breathing slowly through the dull ache in my chest. The next morning, I left the motel, sat in my parked car just outside the bank, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered in a calm, clipped tone. I introduced myself and explained slowly, carefully, that I was calling not because of a physical emergency, but because I had been locked out of my legal residence and discovered what I believed to be financial fraud. I have documentation. I said I was the trustee of a protected estate account. My name has been removed. I did not authorize it. There was a pause. Then, "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger?" I replied, "But the damage has already been done." She took down my details and transferred me to a local officer who asked to meet me in person. I agreed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on a shaded bench outside the bank. A copy of my ID, trust documents, and screenshots of the account spread neatly across my lap. A young officer approached Officer Lyman. He introduced himself kindly, as if speaking to someone who might break if he raised his voice. He listened as I explained everything. I didn't embellish. I didn't speculate. I just told the truth, how I had been managing that account since my husband's death, how I'd been evicted without cause, and how the financial records pointed to clear manipulation and unauthorized access. He asked if I had any evidence that I hadn't signed the account removal. I was recovering from surgery at the time, I said, handing over a hospital intake slip. And this is a copy of the clause in the trust. It requires my written consent for any changes. No exceptions. He looked over the files carefully. To his credit, he didn't dismiss me. He made a call to a supervisor, then told me I'd need to file a formal report at the station so the Financial Crimes Unit could begin review. I thanked him. I have more. I said, maybe even audio files if I'm lucky. I'll send anything relevant once I confirm. He nodded. We'll need those, especially if they show intent. I hadn't taken much with me when they locked me out, but they didn't think to disconnect the hallway camera. Roland had installed it years ago, and I'd quietly kept the cloud link active under my name. The day before Jess's birthday, I'd noticed the way Helene kept watching me from the kitchen doorway. And Aldrich, he'd started pausing his conversations when I entered the room. Something had shifted. Something cold and deliberate. I'd logged in to check the camera feed. Just instinct. I hadn't looked at it in years. What I found made my stomach clench. A clip motion triggered. Time-stamped just 3 days ago. Helene's voice came through, first clipped. Hushed. She's never going to leave unless we push her out. Then Aldrich. I'm not going to throw her out of her own house. Helene. She's old. Helene replied flatly. She'll adapt. We take control of the account. Change the locks. Give her a clean break. She'll be better off. We all will. Aldrich didn't respond immediately. Then, quietly, do it fast. I replayed it twice. My breath stayed even. My hands did not. I knew the law. I knew how easily cases like mine were dismissed as family disputes. But this was deliberate, calculated, and I had it on record. I sorted the recordings, paired them with the corresponding dates from the bank activity, then uploaded them to a secure drive. I printed 3 copies of the most critical documents and walked to the nearest shipping store to overnight one to Officer Lyman. back at the motel. I sat down and wrote a summary affidavit, simple language. No emotion, just the facts. Just what I'd trained other people to do for years when I worked probate. That night, I received an email from Lyman, received and reviewing. This changes things. We'll call you tomorrow. When the call came, it wasn't Lyman. It was his supervisor. They wanted me to meet them at the house the next morning, with my deed and identification. The cruiser was already in the driveway when I arrived. A second car pulled in behind me. Officer Lyman stepped out, alongside a taller woman in plain clothes who introduced herself as Detective Greaves. I handed over my documents, the original deed, the notarized trust, the recent affidavit, and a printed transcript of the recording. She read in silence, her expression unreadable. From inside the house, I could hear movement, muffled voices. A door closing. Wait here, the detective said gently, and they both walked up to the porch. A few minutes later, Helene opened the front door. I saw her smile falter as she registered the badges. She said something I couldn't hear and then stepped aside. They were in there for 20 minutes. When the door opened again, Aldrich appeared. His face had that taut, pale flush he always got when things didn't go as planned. He walked straight toward me, but Lyman stopped him with one hand, raised. Mrs. Corland, the detective said, turning to me. You're legally recognized as co-owner and protected trustee of this property. The documents back that. The recording supports intentional displacement and unauthorized financial activity. You may enter. My fingers curled around the old brass key I'd brought with me, even though I knew the locks had been changed. I stepped into the house I hadn't seen in 10 days. It looked the same on the surface, but inside, it was no longer the same. Something had been lost forever. I walked past them all and made my way to the study. The smell of lemon polish lingered, faint but noticeable. I opened the drawer where I used to keep my letters, and there, buried beneath a pile of tax envelopes, was the flash drive I thought was gone. I closed the drawer and turned to find Helene staring at me from the doorway. You have no idea what you've just done, she said, voice low. I didn't answer. I only walked to the kitchen and picked up the house phone. The attorney I called answered on the first ring. Martin Ellery had been retired for years, but he still picked up when I called. He said it was out of habit, but I knew it was loyalty. He'd helped Roland and me draft the trust, finalize the deed, and set the conditions. I gave him a short update, promised to send the recordings and documents, and he agreed to file an emergency motion the next morning. They'll fight it, he warned, but they have no standing. The documents were never legally altered. That night, I slept in my own bed. The sheets had been changed, but I still recognized the faint scent of lavender from the drawer sachets I used to tuck under the pillows. I didn't bother unpacking my bag. The motion was filed by noon. Within 48 hours, the court issued a temporary freeze on all related accounts. Helene's boutique, funded with what was likely stolen trust money, stalled overnight. Her inventory sat unpaid for in the shipping facility, and clients began pulling their deposits. Aldrich called in sick 2 days in a row. On the third morning, I walked into the kitchen and found an envelope on the counter. Inside was a letter from their attorney, a plea for negotiation. I folded it and placed it under the salt shaker, without reading more than the first line. Then came the formal notification the court had reviewed the trust and verified that the ownership of both the house and estate remained under my legal control. Their claims of power of attorney were invalid, signed during a time I was under post-surgical sedation. Later that afternoon, I stood on the porch as a court officer handed Helene and Aldrich a document with a stamped heading, Notice of Termination of Occupancy. They stared at it as if it were written in another language. You have 72 hours to vacate. the officer said. Aldrich looked at me like a stranger. Helene didn't speak. She just turned away and walked back inside, her shoulders rigid. I stayed on the porch, watching the sky darken over the hedges. They left the morning of the third day, just after sunrise. No dramatic goodbye. No final confrontation. Just the sound of car doors, muffled instructions, and the squeal of tires as they pulled away. I watched from the upstairs window, arms crossed loosely over my chest. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like someone who had finished cleaning up after a long storm. Inside, the house felt still, but no longer foreign. I moved through each room slowly, gathering the items Aldrich and Helene hadn't taken with them, his cufflinks on the bathroom shelf, her scarves still hanging on the back of the door. I folded what I could, packed the rest neatly into boxes, and labeled them without bitterness. They had left in a hurry, but Jessa's room I didn't touch. I left her posters on the wall, her books stacked by the bed, her slippers under the window seat. I dusted, straightened her quilt, and closed the door gently behind me. That room would stay hers, if she ever wanted to come back. I wanted it to feel like she'd never left. The next blow came to them, not from me, but from the court. The state had placed a hold on Helene's business accounts, citing suspected misappropriation of funds connected to a protected estate. Her boutique's supplier canceled the launch event. Social media lit up with speculation. Clients withdrew orders. Meanwhile, Aldrich's employer was contacted for verification of income during the disputed transfer period. That prompted internal HR review. He was suspended pending investigation. That evening, Helene came to the house. She didn't knock, just pounded her palm against the door until I opened it. Her face was flushed, voice high with disbelief. "You're ruining everything," she hissed. "We did all of this for Jessa's future, for stability, and you." I didn't let her finish. I held up my hand and said only, "You've already done enough." I closed the door before she could respond and slid the second deadbolt into place. I stood there for a while, hand resting on the cool brass, letting the silence settle like dust. Later that night, I sat at the dining table with a pen and a thick envelope. I laid out the revised trust, a new custodial clause, and a short letter addressed to Jessa. I didn't know when she would read it, maybe not for years, but it would be waiting. In the morning, I went to the post office and mailed a manila envelope to Aldrich's apartment. I never expected a response. The envelope I sent to Aldrich's apartment contained no demands, no bitterness, just a notarized copy of the updated trust, a certified letter revoking all prior authorizations, and a brief note in my handwriting. This was never about the money. It was about respect. A week passed. Then 2, on the third Sunday morning. I heard the creak of the gate outside. When I looked through the kitchen window, Aldrich stood alone on the walkway, shoulders slouched, hands in his coat pockets like a boy again. He didn't knock. He just stood there, waiting, unsure. I opened the door. His voice was quieter than I remembered. I didn't know she'd go that far. He said, I let the silence hang between us. She said it was temporary, that we'd give it back once things settled. I raised an eyebrow. Unimpressed. Things like my name, my money, or my home. His eyes dropped to the porch floor. I was stupid. No, I said. You were careless with what mattered. He nodded once. I could see he hadn't come to beg, just to acknowledge, and that was enough. Before he turned to go, I handed him a second letter, one I'd written after the trust revision. It outlined the clause that gave Jessa full access to the remaining estate once she turned 25, provided she had no co-signers and no outside interference. You'll have nothing to do with it, I said softly. That's not punishment. It's protection. He took the envelope without a word and walked back down the path. I watched until he disappeared around the hedge. then stepped inside and locked the door behind me, not out of fear, but closure. I still live in this house. I still make apple coffee cake on Saturdays. The garden's overgrown again, but I like it that way. It's quiet now, and every so often, I take out the original deed and run my fingers along Roland's signature. He always told me to protect what was mine, so I did.